I had just completed 3 months of renovating my home when my daughter, Linda, arrived with news that pierced my heart. She strode through the front door without so much as a greeting, surveyed the newly decorated living room, and announced, "Mom, Michael's parents are moving in here next Saturday. Everything's already been arranged." I stood there frozen, clutching a cleaning cloth, watching my 35-year-old daughter speak as though she were organizing her own household. I had spent my entire life savings, $15,000, to make everything fresh and new. The paint, the floors, the furniture. Every corner of that house held my sweat and dreams of finally having a beautiful home for my family. Michael Harris, my son-in-law, entered moments later wearing that forced smile I had come to recognize all too well. "Ms. Hope, you're going to love the company. My parents are quiet people. They won't cause any trouble at all." No. My heart raced as I realized they had already made this decision without even asking whether I agreed. Linda continued talking about how it would be temporary, just until they got organized, but her eyes avoided mine. Michael mentioned that his parents had already sold their apartment and needed somewhere to stay for a few months. I looked at my new furniture, the walls I had painted with such love, and an immense sadness filled my chest. The way Linda spoke hurt me more than I could express. This wasn't the first time she had made decisions about my life without consulting me. But this was different. This was about my sanctuary, the place where I had invested not just money, but hope itself. "Mom, you won't be alone all day. You'll have someone to talk to," Linda said, scrolling through her phone as if the matter were already closed. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't consulted me first, why she simply assumed I would accept this. But the words lodged in my throat like they always did when she used that tone of authority. Michael walked over to my new kitchen and began measuring the spaces with his eyes. "My parents' table will fit perfectly here, and in the living room we'll need to move some things to make space for their favorite armchair." Every word felt like a hammer chipping away at something inside me. They weren't asking for permission. They were informing me of changes they had already planned. Linda added that Frank and Hope Harris would only bring the essentials, but I knew my daughter well enough to distrust such vague promises. That night, after they left, I sat on my new sofa and spoke to the Lord in silent prayer. "Lord, give me strength to understand what is happening. Did I do something wrong by wanting to have my house just the way I always dreamed?" I looked around the room, which still smelled of fresh paint, and felt as though I were losing something precious before I even got to enjoy it. I had worked double shifts at the textile factory for 6 months to save the money for this remodel. Every dollar I spent, I had earned with my own 2 hands, sewing from 5 in the morning until 11 at night. I remembered how I had chosen every paint color, every piece of furniture with the excitement of a 68-year-old woman who, for the first time in her life, could afford to have the nice things she had always wanted. The wooden dining table I had bought on installments, the sky-blue curtains I had embroidered myself at night, the cream-colored living room set I had seen in a store window. It had cost me 4 full months' salary. All of it was now going to be rearranged to accommodate people who hadn't even asked permission to come. Linda had mentioned the Harris family was elderly and needed help, but I was elderly too, and nobody seemed to consider what I needed. At 68 years old, after a lifetime of working for others, caring for others, and sacrificing for others, I thought it was finally my turn to enjoy some peace in my own space. But there I was again, being the last to find out about decisions that directly affected my daily life. The conversation Linda and Michael had in my kitchen replayed in my head like a painful echo. They spoke of my spaces as if they were theirs, of my home as if it were merely a resource available to solve other people's problems. At no point had they asked if I were prepared to share my home, if I had the energy to live with 2 more people day in and day out, if my routine would be disrupted. They had simply assumed I would be available, just as I had always been. I couldn't sleep that night. I got up several times to walk through my house, touching the freshly painted walls, fluffing the pillows on the sofa, breathing in that new smell that had excited me so much just a week before. In every corner, I saw the effort I had made, the overtime hours I had worked, the expenses I had cut from my budget to afford the remodel. I had skipped buying my blood pressure medication. I had eaten beans and rice for months. I had walked miles to save on bus fare, all for the dream of having a decent home. When dawn broke, Linda arrived early with a list of things we needed to do to prepare the house. It wasn't a consultation. It was a list of instructions. Mom, we have to move your dresser to make space in your bedroom. Michael's parent will sleep there, and you can move into the utility room. The utility room, that small, damp space where I kept my cleaning supplies, would now be my bedroom. My daughter had just reduced my status in my own house to that of a maid who sleeps in the storage closet. Linda, I said, my voice trembling, don't you think we should talk about this calmly? I'm an elderly person, too, and I have my habits, my routines. She cut me off with that condescending smile she had developed in recent years, the same one she used when she wanted to make me feel like I was being difficult. Oh, Mom, don't be selfish. It's only temporary. Besides, you've always been so sociable. You love having company all the time. Sociable. That word echoed in my head as I watched my daughter move my things without asking where I wanted them placed. I had been sociable all my life when it came to helping others, welcoming visitors, being available for anyone who needed me. But I had never asked to be forced to be sociable in my own home, losing my privacy and personal space without my consent. Michael arrived with a truck full of boxes before noon. We just brought a few things ahead of time, he explained as he unloaded what looked like the entire contents of a house, boxes marked kitchen, living room, bedroom, books, decorations. Linda saw me staring at the sheer amount of stuff and quickly said it was just easier to bring it all in one trip instead of making several. Easier for whom? I wondered silently. Frank Harris, a 70-year-old man with an authoritarian demeanor, got out of the truck and immediately started giving instructions on where he wanted everything placed. He didn't greet me. He didn't thank me for welcoming them into my home. He simply started reorganizing my space as if he owned it. His wife, Hope Harris, what an irony that she shared my name, was a 65-year-old woman who inspected every corner of my house with a critical eye. She commented on what things needed to be changed so they could be comfortable. This sofa is too close to the window, Hope said, pointing to my favorite sofa, the one I had saved for months to buy. And these curtains let in too much light. Frank needs complete darkness for his naps. Every comment was a small slap in the face to all the love I had poured into decorating my home. They weren't suggestions. They were orders disguised as observations, and Linda nodded along to everything as if they were completely reasonable requests. For that entire day, I became a spectator to the invasion of my own house. I watched them move my furniture, hang their pictures over mine, and reorganize my kitchen to accommodate their utensils and dietary habits. Frank installed his own television in the living room and changed all the channel presets. Hope emptied my cupboards to put in her own dishes and spices. Linda coordinated everything as if it were a normal move, completely ignoring the tears I was trying to hide. At sunset, when they had transformed my home into something unrecognizable, Linda approached me with that smile I had learned to fear. See, doesn't it look so much better like this, Mom? More family-like, more cozy. Familiar for whom, I wanted to ask. Cozy for whom? Because for me, this house no longer felt like my home. It felt like I was a guest in a place that no longer belonged to me. That night, lying in the utility room on a borrowed cot, because my bed was now being used by the Harris family, I heard them rearranging things in what used to be my bedroom. I heard their voices talking about what else they needed to change, what other pieces of my furniture were in their way, how they were going to distribute the space to feel at home. The irony of that phrase caused me a pain I had never experienced before. They wanted to feel at home in my home while I felt like a stranger in the place that had been my refuge for 30 years. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what my living room looked like before that morning, how my kitchen smelled when it only had my spices, how it felt to walk through my house without having to ask permission or apologize for wanting to use my own spaces. But those memories already felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else's life. In just 12 hours, I had gone from being the owner of my home to being a tolerated resident in a space that others had decided to reorganize according to their needs. Michael had mentioned it would be temporary, but none of them had defined what that word meant. Temporary like a week, a month, a year? And who would decide when this temporary period was over? Me, the owner of the house, or them, the people who had shown up with a moving truck and planned for complete reorganization? The uncertainty filled me with an anxiety I hadn't felt even when I was widowed 15 years ago. The next day, I woke up early, as had been my habit my entire life. But when I emerged from the utility room, I found Frank already settled in the kitchen, making his breakfast with my dishes and using my food without asking. "Good morning, Hope," he said without looking up from the newspaper he had spread across my brand-new dining table. It wasn't a conversation. It was barely an acknowledgement of my presence in my own kitchen. Hope came down a little later, already dressed but with disheveled hair, and immediately started inspecting the pantry. "Frank, they don't have the cereal you like here, and your decaf coffee isn't here either." She spoke as if I were responsible for stocking the pantry according to their preferences, as if my kitchen were a hotel that had to adapt to the needs of its guests. When I tried to explain that this was a coffee I bought and the cereal I liked, Hope looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Hope, now that we're family, we have to think about what's best for everyone." Family? That word, which used to fill me with warmth, now sounded like a trap. Linda arrived mid-morning and found her in-laws completely installed, behaving as if they were the hosts and I was a visitor. Instead of noticing how strange the situation was, my daughter smiled, satisfied. "It's so good you already feel at home. Mom, isn't it nice to have the house full of life?" Life that had arrived uninvited and had displaced my own. During that second morning, I observed how each of them had established routines that didn't involve consulting me about anything. Frank had taken ownership of the remote control and the TV schedule. Hope had reorganized the kitchen for convenience and set meal times that didn't align with mine. Linda came and went, offering suggestions on how to make coexistence more harmonious. But all her suggestions involved me changing my habits to adapt to theirs. "Mom, maybe you could eat breakfast a little later so you don't clash with Frank's schedule," Linda suggested while watching her father-in-law read the paper at my dining table. "And in the afternoons when Hope is watching her soaps, you could take the time to do your things in your room." My things in my room. As if my entire house had been reduced to the utility room. As if my life had to be organized around the preferences of people who had just arrived. That afternoon, while I was trying to find a moment to sit in my own living room, I overheard a conversation between Frank and Michael that broke my heart into pieces. "Your mother-in-law is a nice lady," Frank was saying, "but she needs to understand that we're family now, and things have to work differently. She can't keep acting like she's the only one who lives here. Like I'm the only one who lives in my house? The house that I had bought, maintained, remodeled, and cared for over 3 decades? In that moment, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a violent break. It was more like a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long. I realized that Linda, Michael, and the Harris family had built a version of reality where I was some kind of tenant, a tenant who was lucky enough to live in a house that now needed to be shared with its real occupants. A version where my 68 years of life, my decades of work and sacrifice, and my rights as a property owner had been completely erased. That night, lying in the utility room again, listening to the Harris family discuss what other changes they wanted to make in their new house, I made a decision. It was a decision that was going to surprise everyone, but I kept my expression calm and my behavior docile because I had learned that sometimes the best decisions are made in silence, planned in secret, and executed when no one sees them coming. By the 3rd day of living together, a clear pattern had been established. I was an inconvenient guest in my own home. Frank had taken control of the living room and the television, deciding what was watched and at what volume, regardless of the fact that I had been watching my soaps at the same time for 30 years. Hope had completely reorganized my kitchen, putting my dishes in places I couldn't find them, and setting rules about what foods could and couldn't be bought. Linda visited daily to ensure everything was harmonious. But her idea of harmony was simply making sure I adapted completely to everyone else's needs. The straw that broke the camel's back came when Hope informed me they had decided to change the gas provider because the one I used was too expensive, and that they were also going to change the phone company because they needed a more complete family plan. When I asked if they had considered that I was the one paying those bills with my retirement money, she looked at me as though I had said something completely absurd. "Oh, Hope, now that we all live together, it's only logical that we share the expenses. Don't you think that's more fair?" Fair. That word echoed in my head like a funeral bell. It was fair that I should share the expenses of my house with people who had moved and uninvited. It was fair that I slept in the utility room while they occupied my master bedroom. It was fair that I changed all my schedules and habits to accommodate theirs. It was fair that I lose control over my own home so that others could feel comfortable. Everything was fair except asking me what I wanted or needed. That same afternoon, while Linda and Michael were discussing the possibility of making more changes to the house to optimize the space, I snuck into my old bedroom. I knew the Harris family was out shopping. I wanted to retrieve some of my personal things, photographs and memories that had been buried under their belongings. What I found left me speechless. They had packed all of my things into cardboard boxes as if they were objects to be stored away when they were no longer needed. My family photographs, my diplomas from my sewing courses, the love letters from my late husband, the gifts Linda had given me over the years, everything was packed away carelessly in boxes as if it were just clutter that needed to be cleared out. Instead, the dresser was full of Hope's clothes. The vanity was covered in her cosmetics and perfumes, and on the nightstand were photographs of the Harris family. My bedroom had been completely erased and replaced by the lives of other people. Linda walked in while I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes that contained 30 years of my personal life. Instead of understanding why I was crying, she got upset with me for digging through things that were already organized. "Mom, we already put all this away to make space. If you need something specific, just tell me and I'll get it for you." She was offering me limited, supervised access to my own memories, like I was a child who needed permission to touch her own toys. "Linda," I said with a calmness that surprised even me, "do you even realize what is happening here?" She sighed with that look of false patience she had perfected over the last few days. "Mom, what's happening is that we're being united family, supporting each other. Michael's parents needed a place to stay, and we have the space. It's that simple. Simple for everyone except the person whose life had been completely rearranged without her consent." That night, after eating dinner in silence while the Harris family argued over what TV show to watch, I went to the utility room early. But instead of going to bed, I stayed awake, planning something I never imagined I would be capable of. It was a quiet plan, a discreet one that nobody would see coming because they had all assumed I was too docile, too grateful, too dependent to make any drastic decisions. All my life I had been the woman who adapted, the one who gave in, the one who found ways to make things work without creating conflict. I had raised Linda alone after her father abandoned us, working double shifts to give her everything she needed. I had cared for my sick mother for 10 years until she passed. I had been the sister who was always available, the friend who never failed, the neighbor everyone could count on. But at 68 years old, living like a stranger in my own home, I realized that all that kindness had simply made me someone whose needs didn't matter to anyone. On the 4th day, Linda arrived with news that confirmed everything I had been fearing. "Mom, we were talking and we think it would be good to make some more permanent changes to the house. Michael spoke with an architect friend of his, and he says we can expand the little room where you're sleeping. We can add your own little bathroom and a small kitchenette. That way, you have more independence and we'll all be more comfortable." Independence. They were offering me independence in a maid's quarters built on the property of my own house. The proposal was clear. They would keep the main house, my living room, my kitchen, my bedroom, my dining room, and I would become the tenant of an addition built specifically to keep me out of their way. Linda presented this idea as if it were a gift, a generous solution that would solve all the coexistence problems. What she was really offering was my own physical and emotional exile disguised as consideration for my needs. And who is going to pay for this renovation? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Well, Mom, we thought that since it's for your benefit and you'll be the one enjoying it the most, it would only be fair if you contributed the main part of the cost. Michael already got some estimates, and it's not that much money. Not that much money to turn the owner of the house into an expensive tenant on her own land. Not that much money to complete my expulsion from the spaces I had worked my whole life to maintain." In that moment, I knew I had reached my limit. I was not going to be complicit in my own disappearance. I was not going to finance the construction of my own exile. I was not going to smile and say thank you while they turned me into a burden that had to be hidden in a corner of the yard. The time had come to make a decision that would change everything, but no one would see it coming until it was far too late to stop it. What they didn't know was that a 68-year-old woman who had survived a difficult marriage, raised a daughter alone, and worked 40 years to buy and maintain her house had resources they had never even considered, and I was about to use every single one of them. For the next 2 weeks, I became a silent observer of the complete transformation of my home. Frank Harris had established a rigorous schedule for everything. Breakfast at 7 sharp, news at 8, lunch at 2, dinner at 7 in the evening. It wasn't a suggestion or a proposal for living together. It was a set of regulations that he had imposed and that everyone else, including me, had to follow. When I tried to explain that I had my own schedules after 68 years of life, he looked at me as if I were being capricious. Hope, in a house where many people live, there has to be order. We can't all just be doing our own thing. Doing our own thing in my own house. The irony of that phrase caused me deep sadness every time I heard it. Frank spoke as if he had arrived to bring order to a place that was disorganized, when the reality was he had arrived to impose his order on a house that had been functioning perfectly fine with my rules for 3 decades. Hope had reorganized my kitchen so much that I couldn't even find my own plates. When I asked her where she had put my favorite set of teacups, she answered with a condescending smile. "Oh, Hope, those cups are very old. I brought some much nicer, more modern ones." My old cups. They were the cups my late husband had given me for our 10th anniversary, the only material things I had left of him besides my wedding ring. But to Hope, they were just old objects that needed to be replaced with something more modern. When I insisted that I wanted to use my cups, she sighed dramatically and muttered something about people who cling to the past. The past she wanted me to forget was my own history, my own memories, my own identity within my home. Linda came by every afternoon to supervise that the coexistence was harmonious. But her idea of harmony consisted exclusively of checking that I wasn't causing any problems for the Harris family. "How did your mom behave today?" she would ask Hope directly, as if I were a child on probation. "She didn't give you any trouble, did she? She didn't complain about anything." Each question was a small humiliation that stabbed me in the heart. It confirmed that my own daughter saw me as a burden to be managed, not as the owner of the house who deserved respect in her own home. One afternoon, while I was washing dishes in a kitchen I no longer recognized as mine, I heard Linda talking to Michael in the living room. "My mom has been quieter lately. I think she's finally starting to understand that the situation is better for everyone. Better for everyone except me." My silence, which they interpreted as acceptance, was actually the result of a sadness so profound it had taken away my will to fight. I wasn't accepting the situation. I was surrendering to it. And there was a huge difference between those two things. During those 2 weeks, I developed a habit of getting up very early, before the Harris family woke up, just to have at least 1 hour of solitude in my own house. I would sit in the kitchen, with my coffee, looking out the window of the yard where I had planted roses for so many years, trying to remember what it felt like to be the owner of my own space. But even those moments of peace were interrupted when Frank would come down and look at me as if I were invading his kitchen. "Good morning. Hope, did you make coffee for everyone yet? Did you make coffee for everyone yet?" As if it were my obligation to be the living maid, as if my waking up early was an opportunity for me to serve them, not a desperate attempt to find a few minutes of peace in my own home. When I explained that I had only made coffee for myself, as I had done for 30 years, he would sigh with that expression of patience that adults reserve for badly behaved children. "Well, since you're already here, you could make a little more. It's the same amount of work, after all." It was not the same amount of work. Making coffee for one person who is going to drink it slowly, thinking her own thoughts, planning her day, is not the same as making coffee as part of a mandatory domestic service for people who consider that service their right. But Frank didn't understand that difference, or he didn't care to. To him, I was just a woman living in the same house, and therefore I had to contribute with domestic labor. It didn't matter that the house was mine or that my contributions were much greater than washing dishes and making coffee. One morning, while I was preparing breakfast for 4 people when I used to only prepare it for myself, I vividly remember the time when Linda was little and I worked double shifts at the textile factory. I would get up at 4 in the morning to pack her lunch. I would take her to my neighbor Rose's house, who watched her while I worked. I would run to the factory to work my 7 to 3 shift. Then I would run to pick up Linda, stop by the market to buy groceries for dinner, get home to cook and clean, help her with her homework, and I would go to bed around midnight, only to repeat the routine the next day. For 10 years, I lived like that, sacrificing my dreams, my rest, my chances of finding love again. Also, Linda could have what she needed. I never complained. I never made her feel like a burden. I never held her responsible for my sacrifices. I worked weekends. I took extra jobs. I sold a few pieces of jewelry I had, all to pay for private school, nice clothes, school supplies, outings with her friends. I wanted her to have the opportunities one never had. To study, to be able to choose her future without the financial limitations I had faced. When Linda married Michael, I felt a mix of pride and melancholy. Pride because I had succeeded in raising a successful daughter who had finished college, found a hard-working husband, and could have a comfortable life. Melancholy because I knew my job as a mother was over, and now I would have to learn to live for myself after 2 decades of living exclusively for her. But I never imagined that my daughter would interpret my availability and generosity as signs that I had no life of my own, no needs of my own, and no right to make my own decisions. I remembered the day I paid off the mortgage on this house. Linda was already married, living in her own apartment with her job and her independent life. I was 53 years old, and for the first time in decades, I found myself living alone, responsible only for myself, able to make decisions without consulting anyone. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Terrifying because I didn't know who I was when I wasn't being a mother or an employee or a caregiver. Liberating because I could wake up without someone else's schedule, eat whatever I felt like, watch TV in my favorite language, and decorate my house according to my own tastes. For 15 years, I had enjoyed that freedom. I had learned to cook dishes I had always wanted to try. I had made friends with the neighbors. I had taken knitting classes at the community center. I had taken bus trips to visit my sisters in other states. It wasn't an exciting life by younger people's standards, but it was my life built according to my own desires and needs. Every piece of furniture in the house I had chosen. Every color on the walls reflected my personality. Every corner held memories of moments I had enjoyed in solitude or with guests I chose to receive. Now, serving breakfast to people who had completely reorganized my living space, I realized I had gone back to being what I was during the first half of my life, someone whose existence revolved around the needs of others, someone whose personal preferences were considered secondary, someone who should be grateful just to have a place to sleep and eat, even if that place was her own house. The difference was when Linda was little, I chose to make those sacrifices out of motherly love. Now they were being imposed on me without my consent. Frank finished his breakfast and got up from the table without taking his plate or saying thank you. It was a habit he had established from day one. He ate. I cleaned up as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When Hope finished, she did the same and added, "Hope, some of my friends are coming over for coffee this afternoon. Could you make some scones? They're used to me serving them homemade things." It wasn't a request. It was an order disguised as a favor. She didn't ask if I had time or the desire or the ingredients to make scones. She simply assumed I would be available to cook for her guests. "Hope," I said in the calmest voice I could find, "I also had plans for this afternoon. I wanted to go to the market and visit my friend Rose." She looked at me as if I had said something completely absurd. "Oh, but you can do those things any day. My friends only visit every once in a while." My plans, which included maintaining social relationships I had cultivated for decades, were things I could do any day. Her plans were priorities, urgent. My social life was disposable. Hers was important. That afternoon, while I was making scones for Hope's friends, I thought about my dear friend Rose. She had been my confidant and my support during the most difficult times of my life. Rose was the one who helped me when Linda was sick, and I had no money for the doctor. Rose was the one who lent me money for school supplies when I was between jobs. Rose was the one who stayed with me at the hospital when I had my gallbladder removed and Linda couldn't miss wake. Rose was the person who knew me best in the world. And now I couldn't visit her because I had to make scones for the friends of a woman who had come to live in my house uninvited. Hope's friends arrived at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I became the invisible servant at a social gathering in my own living room. I served coffee. I brought more scones. I collected plates while they talked as if I wasn't even there. When one of them complimented the scones, Hope smiled and said, "Oh yes, Hope is very good in the kitchen. She has a real knack for desserts." As if I were her talented housekeeper, not the owner of the house who had been forced to cook for her guests. During the whole gathering, I listened to Hope describe her new house to her friends. She talked about the changes they had made, how they had improved the layout of the spaces, the plans they had for future renovations. Her friends congratulated her on finding such a comfortable place and for being so lucky to live in such a beautiful house. At no point did she mention that the house had an owner, that those changes had been made without consulting that owner, or that the future plans would affect another person's life. In her version of reality, she and Frank were the protagonists of a successful housing story, and I was just a secondary character barely worth mentioning. When the friends left, Hope thanked me for helping her with the meeting, helping her, as if making scones and serving coffee in my own home was a favor I was doing for her, not an imposition she had forced on me. Everything was delicious. Hope, my friends were delighted. They complimented you a lot on the scones. She was giving me feedback on my performance as a servant, not acknowledging that I had sacrificed my own plans to satisfy hers. That night, after washing all the dishes from the party and cleaning the living room where her guest had been, I sat in the utility room that was now my bedroom. I pulled out a box of photographs that I had managed to rescue before the Harris family completely reorganized my old room. They were photos from different eras of my life: my wedding, Linda as a baby, family birthdays, outings with friends, Christmas celebrations.